days, and then Andrea Lyons stole her and moved her to Chicago, to DePaul, where she currently is. I'm still working on it. And I think once you listen to Cynthia, you will understand why I want her permanently in Georgia, if at all possible. Cynthia Roseberry.
What is taking so long? How long is a judge going to wait before declaring a mistrial? Haven't they been back there long enough, even for a murder charge, deliberating longer than the trial seems too long? She went back over the trial. She developed a theory of the case, embracing the facts beyond change. The investigation was driven by the theory of the case, gathering information, witnesses, and evidence to move the theory forward, reshaping the theory when necessary so that it made sense. She conserved her resources by focusing on the theory. Nobody has enough time to track down all of the evidence and all of the facts and all of the witnesses. So she focused on the roads that led to the theory. She made sure her investigator was on board so that he would know what the theory was and he could add to the process in a meaningful way. Rather than waiting and asking for directions, the investigator could go out there and act on instinct, driven by the theory of the case, discovering things that moved the theory forward. She had found the emotional center because she sat and rocked with her client, Robert, and they bonded. She remembered their first visit. She wore her pantsuit, blue like the Caribbean Sea, summer weight wool. The shirt was white and starched, crisp like that first potato chip out of the bag. The uniform, in fact, that she'd adopted for her jailhouse visits. She hoped it made her look smart. She hoped it made her look mature. She hoped it made her look unattractive. That's what a female lawyer wants during a jail visit. And she remembered how surprised Robert was the first time she sat down with him at that gray metal table. Well, the table that once was gray. The paint was now peeling like sunburned skin. And she remembered the look on his face when she didn't ask him about the case on that first visit, but they just sat and talked, and she got to know him first. And Robert trusted her enough to share his fears and his vulnerability and his hopes. And she shared something of herself with him. And that's how they laid the foundation for their relationship. That's how he started to trust her. And that's how she got to the emotional center of the case. That's how she could represent him in a way that was respectful of his humanity. That's why she never referred to him as my client in front of the jury. What is taking them so long? Now, she managed to finally understand the difference between theory and theme. Theory being the overarching story of her client's innocence, and theme being a subpart of the theory. Tools, if you will, that the jurors were now using during deliberations. The very words that Robert would use if he was back there in that room with them. She used both theory and theme, not only during the investigation, but from voir dire to verdict. She was true to her theory. She had chosen a course of action, and she stuck with it. Every examination marched toward her goal and developed the theory. Every demonstration, every objection, every motion was steadfast on the course that the theory of the case required. mean, she searched her memory for the things that she learned at the National Criminal Defense College. And storytelling, she knew now, was more than telling some story about an analogous situation and asking the jury to make a bridge between that situation and Robert's case. Storytelling was telling Robert's story of innocence. Using all of the elements that they taught her about. Fill in the backdrop, she thought. The backstory. Everything the prosecutor did not want the jury to know. That he loved his wife Rachel since the day they met in 10th grade science at Booker T. Washington High School. That he was struggling with the word geothermal. And before Valerie and her crew could laugh, Rachel said the word out loud for him, geothermal, and smiled at him. And from that point on, Robert was in love. That he was heartbroken over his wife's infidelity, but not heartbroken enough to kill her and her lover, his so-called best friend, Derek. They played in Pee Wee League together. Derek was the best catcher any pitcher could hope for. Prom was a double date, and Derek knew that Robert was going to pop the question before Rachel did. Robert could never kill his best friend, even in cold blood, even after he found him naked with Rachel. Derek had been his best man. Yeah, she was sure she had told that backstory to the jury. She had expanded the focus from the moment the gun went off to the years of happiness he shared with Rachel before then. His hopes for his daughters, how vulnerable they made him feel, and how he wished he could always keep them safe, but feared he couldn't. She told the jury about the noise that Rachel heard that night while Robert was doing a double at the GM plant, and how he bought the gun at the pawn shop to keep them safe. And she stretched it further to include the nearly lifelong relationship that Robert and Derek had. And she filled in all of the blank spaces that the prosecutor didn't want the jury to know about. That the prosecutor wanted to remain cold and empty and devoid of humanity. She was sure she'd done that right. I mean, hadn't she carefully chosen poignant details that painted a picture of who Robert was? Important details, they taught her, were an element of storytelling. Important details. Hadn't she taken a moment in his life to illustrate his kind and gentle nature? The way he played with his children every Saturday morning. Just the three of them, Daddy and the girls. Before Mommy got up, a bowl of sugar squares, an hour of cartoons, and a boatload of giggles. Every Saturday. He didn't know that Saturday 2 years ago would be the last. The sound of the gunshot rang out, shattering the silence of the quiet house. And instead of surprising Rachel with an evening out on the town after he dropped the kids off with her mom, he heard the gun go off. And instinctively, he just ran into the bedroom and rushed there to check for Rachel's safety. And there he saw her on the bed, naked, bleeding, dying. And his instinct was to reach out for the gun. What's taking them so long? But as he grabbed the gun, what's taking them so long? Juror number 4 was surely back there telling them. As he grabbed the gun, Instinctively, the gun went off, and this time the bullet found Derek's chest. Naked. The gun he brought home for their protection. What's taking them so long? Juror number 4 had to be back there telling them about the time the gun went off in her brother's hand. That's what they talked about during voir dire. Surely she was telling them it was possible. But had she explored that fully during voir dire? And had she let the juror tell that story? And were they thinking about that now, back there after this long trial? That was part of the plot. And they taught her that every good story has a plot. Had she made a mistake in casting the gun as the villain? Did the jury believe that Robert had no way of knowing that the gun wouldn't work? That he'd never fired it since he bought it at the pawn shop? Had she cast Robert wrong? I mean, it's important to establish who the characters are in the story. That's what she learned. And that's an element of storytelling, the characters. And had she made him a saint, instead of just making him a human being with faults just like the jurors? Was she careful when she characterized the affair as something he could forgive? I knew I should have gone with the wife needed a good killing, because she knew that. You know, what is taking them so long? She knew she'd nail picture painting with words. She used phrases like Saturday morning giggles that fill the house before first morning light. She liked that one. And she used phrases like, when he saw her lying there, he couldn't speak, as if her blood filled his throat and choked away sound. Yeah, she knew she did that. She used active, powerful language and soft, tender words when she needed to and at the right times. She used language that was appropriate for the emotional context. I even used first person, she thought. She avoided toxic language like not guilty and used words like innocent instead. Her motion in limine to keep the prosecutor from using the term victim was denied, but she at least found a way to refer to Robert's wife. It was by her name. Her pacing and intonation and volume changed when she wanted to emphasize something. She owned the courtroom and used the space to illustrate her story, moving only with purpose and planting herself when she wanted to emphasize a point. What is taking them so long? She thought about the way she prepared. She thought about how she looked through children's books to learn about storytelling, like Aesop's Fables, to deconstruct stories. She thought about when she went to the Barnes & Noble that Saturday morning at 10. It was a fall morning, so it was brisk and kind of moist from the drizzling rain. And she wore that old gray sweater that she bought when she was a 1L, the one that she wore to every exam. And she smiled when she thought how silly she must have looked sitting there in the reading circle with the children, large and looming over them, but laughing at the appropriate time and feeling sadness when the story required it. She had learned a lot about storytelling from children's stories. Now, listening listening to country and western music wasn't as much fun for me. I got tears in my ears from lying on my back in my bed while crying over you. She was glad she decided not to go with that one. She'd gone through movie titles, and she read articles about storytelling, like The Elements of Good Storytelling by Kimberly Appelcline, Appelcline, that she found on Skotos.net. Not to mention going over her grandmother's sayings. Honey, you can't point a finger at somebody without having 3 of them pointing back at you. She liked that part. But what she liked best was sitting and rocking with Robert and hearing his grandmother's sayings that she could use. And the little gem that she got was that juror number 10 lived in the same subdivision as his grandmother. She believed she told a credible story, not just in opening and closing, but through each examination. From the coroner who found gunpowder residue on Derek's hands, to the pawn shop owner who admitted that he'd never fired the gun. But had she used everything that they taught her at the college? Did she cease and desist from using legalese, words that the jurors can't even pronounce? What about throat clearers like, well, I think, so, Had she gotten rid of those? Had she varied the length of her sentences, some short and others longer, to prove a point? Had she used rhetorical questions? Did her trilogies dramatize, humanize, and organize? Speaking of organization, was it the right choice to present the story out of chronological order? She thought about that, and it helped the prosecutor to keep it in chronological order. She used flashbacks, like Pulp Fiction, and moved from point to point in the story that emphasized what she needed. And she'd use recency and primacy, too. You know, the idea that the jury remembers what they hear first and what they hear last. She learned to make a mediocre sandwich. The good stuff on the ends like bread, the mediocre stuff in the middle like meat. What is taking them so long? Of course, she developed the story by spending time with Robert, learning about his life and his feelings, understanding his point of view as best she could. But she went to that house, and she went in that bedroom, and she stood there, and she visualized how the gun went off, just like Robert had told her. That's how she referred to it every time, the gun going off. She knew that that was a basic element of storytelling, the setting. They taught her that she had to set the setting. Where did the story happen? And she knew the only way she could walk the jury into that room and to feel those feelings was to go there herself. Show them what happened, she remembered. Don't just tell them. They've got to feel what Robert felt. What is taking so long? Is that the bailiff? They got a verdict. Already? Can you get Robert to bring him out here for me? All right, don't look scared when your client comes out. Don't look scared. Look brave, look brave. Hey, they got a verdict. Okay. All rise.
presentation is going to need PowerPoint. Take a deep breath, go get another cup of coffee, come back 5 minutes. While we make sure we have